The chief executive of House of Fraser has said there is a Wild West scenario of change going on the high street. Alex Williamson was speaking after announcing the closure of more than half of House of Fraser's stores and the loss of up to 6,000 jobs. Pound World is also likely to go into administration, putting a further 5,300 jobs at risk. So can the high street be saved? Joining us to discuss that are Catherine Colebrook, Chief Economist at the Institute for Public Policy Research, and James Woudhuysen, Professor of Forecasting and Innovation at London South Bank University. Hello to you both. Do you agree, Catherine Colebrook, that we're facing a Wild West scenario on the high street?
Well, I think the high street's definitely facing lots of different challenges all at once. So technology being the obvious one. Technology is changing what we buy. It's also changing how we shop. There's also the fact that we have economic factors. A slow growth environment means people don't necessarily want to spend very much money, and when they do spend it, they'd rather go to big box stores where things are cheaper. So I think there are lots and lots of challenges that the high street is facing, and I think the high street is particularly vulnerable because it has a much higher set of costs to deal with than perhaps the online competitors.
Yeah, and certainly that was one of the factors with House of Fraser, wasn't it, James Woudhuysen? These high business rates, rental, especially on properties like Oxford Street, for example.
Well, that's true. And also, department stores have long been regarded as the dinosaurs of the retail business. So there are the problems that Catherine outlines. But I think if you notice, it's very easy to blame business rates or new technology or slow consumer expenditure. But all of that focuses on other people. I think retailers themselves need to be innovating much more than they are, and I can tell you how. But to blame other people is abdicating responsibility, and particularly for innovation, we've had too much of that in this country. What they need to do is automate the back office, which is principally very scrappy and bad accommodation for staff, no easy means of getting stuff from the lorries and the trucks through to the back, storing it and then getting it out to the front in click and collect situations, for example. The only company I know that's really trying to bring robots to retailing, and it's the back office, not the shop floor, is Zara. They are doing that to speed up the queues for click and collect. And in fact, you deliver the goods through a terminal, looks like a cash point, and you collect the goods as a consumer. That's one thing. The other thing is to make the shop floor have a much higher and better consumer experience per square metre. You heard it here first. It's just not exciting enough and it's not quick enough compared with Jeff Bezos and Amazon. So we're talking a need to have 3D printing, theatre, education, cooking, smells, tastes, live music, everything that Amazon can't do to do with the real 3D world of museums, of exhibitions, of art classes and all of these things. That's what the high street has failed to innovate about, as they always, fight the last war rather than the next one. You can't even get Wi-Fi in most retailers, not properly. So there is technological stuff to do.
Let me bring you in on that. Is it about high street retailers needing to add to the experience for consumers?
Well, I mean, James is undoubtedly right that if retailers don't innovate, then consumers won't choose to go there. But I think that retailers can only do, and individual businesses, in fact, can only do so much on their own. We need to have a bit more collective action. And I think in terms of what the high street offers for consumers, and not just consumers, but people who simply want to go to the high street to have an experience, to go out, then I think it needs to be about local government doing more on planning, making the high street a nicer place to be, which isn't necessarily down to individual businesses choosing to make their own environments better. I think a collective response to this is probably what needs to happen.
What about James talking about innovation and automation? I mean, ultimately, that's going to lead to more job losses, isn't it?
Well, it will, but I think we can choose how we respond. We can choose how we respond to automation as a trend, and we can choose what sorts of jobs and how we support people who may lose their jobs in retail. So the 6,000 people who've lost their jobs or may lose their jobs as a result of what's been announced today, we should be thinking, government should be thinking about how we cope with those job losses and similar job losses across the economy as the economy changes, and that change is coming, it's already happening, and it's not necessarily something that individual firms will take responsibility for. And so I think that automation is something that should be embraced, but it should be embraced fully recognising that simply allowing it to happen in an unstrategic and chaotic fashion will not particularly benefit the society and people, and nor will it ultimately benefit businesses.
James Woudhuysen, you're shaking your head at that.
Well, it sounds fine, but, there's precious little automation happening in mainstream manufacturing in Britain, not to the extent that we could really do it. We're not up there with the South Koreans in the penetration of one robot for every 20 jobs in manufacturing. And in retailing, it's even worse. Now, they pay very low wages in retailing, and that's definitely one factor which is preventing automation. So before we worry about automation taking tons of jobs, we first ought to do it. And particularly the menial tasks, the logistics tasks of cleaning, delivery, stacking, unstacking, all the noise those pallets make when they're getting the big secondary packaging boxes off the shelves and all the rest of it. It's fairly backward, the whole sector. And, fears of thousands of jobs being lost because of IT and the robots, that's not really why House of Fraser is in the trouble that's in, or indeed Poundland. The problem is management strategy, management innovation, and a whole variety of technologies, light, sound, all the things that go with performing arts and everything. And if you pay the staff more wages, there'll probably be some incentive to automate the menial jobs and to make the staff take on the customer service tasks of being friendly, being intelligent about the stock, knowing where things are, being interesting and interested. That's the promise of automation if it's managed properly. But first, we've got to do it.
So James has set out his vision of the high street in the future. Catherine, how do you see it? What is the high street going to look like in the future if, as James described it, these so-called dinosaurs, department stores, don't survive?
Well, much of what James has said I agree with. I think that it's about making the experience more interesting for the consumer and keeping things lively. But I think it's probably not just about retail. So ultimately, we're facing quite a profound trend of people choosing to spend less on stuff and more on experiences, and high streets probably need to recognise that it's unlikely in the future to be all about selling things to people. It might be more about getting them to come for because that's where they live, or because it's where they work, in an office rather than in a shop, or whatever the future of work may be. It's likely that high streets need to diversify away from simply being about shopping. So much of what James says I think is true in that context. I definitely think the future is about us going to the high street for all sorts of different reasons. So I think we can probably agree that we would like to retain what we get from a high street, a good high street. We don't want to lose that if the way that the world works changes and we stop going into shops to buy things. I think it's quite important that we retain it as a resource for communities, and that we find a way of keeping it relevant.
So bringing more people to the high street for different reasons, James?
Well, I think that's right. I mean, I'm not sentimental about communities. I think a community is something you grow up in and get the heck out of. But there is a role for parent-teachers associations, for local small and medium enterprises, for the community, for playgroups, for young kids and for nurseries and all of this, in the educational, theatrical, service-orientated environments that the British High Street has failed to move to. They think that the same old brands and the same old formats and the W.H. Smiths and the Sainsbury's and so on, they're capturing the public imagination with a discount. No. The public wants better, it deserves better, it reads the papers, and it's being offered a lot more by, say, the refurbishment of a local cinema. Why can't they show more films, better films, retailers, I mean? Why can't they also, to take Catherine's point, be in the cinema business and the theatre business and the clubs business and all the rest of it? It's a failure of imagination. The other factors, Amazon, the business rates, the, driving and parking and all the rest of it, they're important, but, we've got to look to ourselves as retailers to get it right.
OK. James Woudhuysen and Catherine Colebrook, thank you both very much for talking to us. Let's cross over to Sky Sports Centre now for an update.